Hello. ASM's Hydrasynth has been out for 5 years at this point, and it would be fair to say that the Hydrasynth is quite popular. And in this video, I'm going to show the Hydrasynth doing some of those things that I think are why. Now, I was hired to make this by a company called Source Distribution, who I used to work for, and 5 years ago, I was there when I welcomed a representative from the ASM company into an office who was there to show me an as yet unreleased synth. That person's name was Daniel Troberg. Daniel sat me down and talked me through the features of the Hydrasynth and then let me experiment with the effects and the sound design and the filters as we're going to play with in this video. And at the end of the meeting, I said to my boss, we absolutely positively have to take this brand on because this is insane. This thing is such a good synth. So what is it in that office 5 years ago that blew my mind? And maybe by extension, why is it that other people like this thing so very much? Reason 1. Hydrasynth has insane sonic power. On most traditional analog synths, you will tend to have a relatively limited selection of waveforms. Perhaps you have the sine, a very simple and fun one, triangle, saw, and square. That's usually it. Obviously, you have more than one oscillator, so you can blend them, and there are things like FM and sync, and perhaps a wave folder that let you twist and bend those waveforms into different things. But on the Hydrasynth, you have 219 waveforms. Which is a lot. Now, just like this, I can have one waveform, and then I can come to the second oscillator and have a different waveform, and then turn up its volume in the mixer. And create mixed hybrids. There is, in fact, a third oscillator. So I can build a big fat sound. Now that by itself would be cool. However, obviously on the Hydrasynth there's more to it, and probably the first and most important thing, if I have it so that we just hear oscillator 1, is that you can create what are called wave tables. A wave table is a table with a bunch of waves arranged on it, which you can blend between. And on wave table synths of yesteryear, often those tables would be created for you. You would only be able to blend between the selection of waveforms that the synth designer had made available. But on here, we turn this dial and activate a thing called wave scan. And we see a thing that says wave list edit. And in this screen, we see 8 locations. And if I do something like turn the dial randomly so that all of the waveforms have different names, and then exit, then what I have done is I've created my own wavetable. This sounds like the modern music that children are dancing to. And as I move wave scan from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6, we note that there are in-between numbers. I am creating new waveforms. Here between 1 and 2 is 1.5. That's a new waveform that is a morph of 1 and 2. And I can come in here and I can change what 1 and 2 are to different things, back out, and then I get a different sound. So cool. You create these little hybrid waveforms, and you do so very easily. But that's not all. We then have these things called mutants. And a mutant is like an effect, except it really gets to the heart of the sound. It doesn't sound like choruses and reverbs. It sounds like the waveform itself is being further shaped in a really fundamental way. And there are a bunch of these different modes, including multiple different types of PWM, each which have different sounds and personalities. But here, for example, is FM Lin, which is linear FM. similar to what is done in the DX7 synthesizer. And here where we can just enable it. Ooh. And here by choosing oscillator 2 as the source, wow. I'm creating a sound by FMing oscillator 2 against 1. But there are built-in waveforms like sine. I can then change the ratio. Ooh. Then I could add a bit of envelope. Then I could filter it, couldn't I? Add a bit of drive. Nice. And what I could then do is change the wave scan. Oh, oh. Oh, that's nice. And so I created a wavetable. I've now created FM synthesis of that wavetable, and I've still got a second mutant free. Like, we could, for example, try PWM squeeze, where it will effectively time stretch parts of the waveform and kind of stretch and pull it out. If we have the gift of sight, we can even see on the screen how the waveform is kind of pushed and pulled. That is absolutely crackers. And there's 2 sets of oscillators, which have 2 sets of mutants for each of them. Plus ring modulation, and then things like the mixer, where we can do simple things like control the volume, but also kind of wonderful things, like pan the oscillators so that one is left and one is right and one is in the middle. That's a thing you can do. So if I turn this up, End up going rabbit holes with this thing. By the way, you were starting to hear me introduce the 5 LFOs and the 5 envelopes that it has, as well as the multiple effect blocks that it has, as well as the multiple filters that it has, as well as each section and block full of little tricks, like the ability to pan the oscillators and like to modulate everything. From the mutant settings to the oscillators, the scanning of the wavetables, the filters, yeah. And there's the 2 other sonic things that I want to mention, which is that there are multiple types of filter, from analog modeled filters that are based on things like the Moog, but are resonance compensated so that they don't lose bass, as well as things based on like the MS-20, this Thriller, which is based on like quite an obscure filter design, whose name escapes me. But sounds nice. Let's do some proper sweeps, shall we? Wow. Add a few more oscillators. Ooh. Ooh. Fun. I mean, I'm not even touching on all of the various things, like, for example, the LFOs have all these different wave shapes and modes, including there's a stepped mode. So if you come in here, you can go to step edit. You can also then randomize all of the steps of the LFO here. So this is LFO 2. So we're making basically a sequencer. And I could do something like go LFO to filter please by this amount. I did that so fast, but I held LFO2, I pushed the block I wanted to go to, and now I've routed the filter. Then I'm add a bit of like rotary, add some cloud. That's like a high velocity blast through without going into all of the details, all the clever little things that are in here, and obviously the myriad ways that you can use it more subtly to create different tones and textures. And that may beg this question that always comes up in these kinds of discussions. What's the point of a piece of hardware that runs software? What is the point of a physical device that could be a plugin, right? Reason 2, the Hydrasynth has arguably the best user interface of any digital synth ever made. The experience that we have when we play with a musical instrument is absolutely critical. And I would argue in many respects that its user interface that is more important than sound, because something could sound amazing, but if it's no fun to play with, then you are less likely to spend the time it takes to find those amazing sounds. And in the Hydrasynth, you have a device that was designed by people who've used synths for decades and have said, how can we make this process as painless as it could possibly be? And their big idea is not an original one. There are synths before this that have this concept in it, but there are not many thereafter, and that's a mistake, because this is genius. The way the Hydrasynth works, as you may be able to see, is that I am able to push buttons in the bottom left, and the buttons are this wonderful representation of the structure of the Hydrasynth internally. From the oscillators to the mutants, it shows you, or lets you feel, how the synth is laid out and structured. And by simply pushing these buttons, the associated section is shown in the top right, in this area called Master Control. And in this area, we have 8 endless encoders, and we have screens which show us what each row of encoders is doing at that point. And there are page buttons here that only light up when there is something to see on the other pages. So, for example, if I come to Mixer, I see here from the illumination that there is more to see, until the down arrow isn't lit anymore. It allows me to have a two-handed operation where I'm using one hand to choose where I want to go, and I'm using my right hand to navigate and adjust the controls once I get there. There is an exit button to always bring you back out into the main screen. And the idea here is you just can't get lost. You can always push exit in the top right to get back out. And if you have the gift of sight, you can always look down and see which section is illuminated, or simply press for the area you want. By the way, you can tap this multiple times to page through without even having to push the up and down arrows. Another thing that is hard to communicate in a video is how insanely good the thing feels with special focus to these encoders. The encoders, I don't know what they are, I don't know where they are made, but they are as solid as you could possibly hope them to be. And they have a really pleasing feel and ballistics. That is to say that when you turn the dials, you can turn them slowly and get fine control, and you can whip them quickly, and suddenly you're back to 0 or up to 128, or you get all the fine control that you need within. Those things are really subtle and hard to define, but they make a difference, and you can bet your bum that this didn't happen by accident. People have to design all of these things to work as well as they do. And things like the Wave Designer, I can go months without using this, but I never struggle to know how this works. I can see that it says Wave List Edit and the light lights up. And then there are these other things that we can do. For example, there's a random button. And if you push the random button here twice, it will just create a totally random patch, which is wonderful. And we'll get more into it in a sec, but I bring it up as we initialize this. I'll go in here to turn this into a wave scan, go into the wave list edit, and then if I hold random and go random, 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 random like that, then it will randomize these things. So nice. And I get a completely randomized wave scan list without me having to turn 8 dials. The other thing you can do is hold Shift. And if you hold Shift and turn any of the dials at any point, what it does is it shows you the neighborly waveforms, all of the 219 waveforms that you have, and it will give you the neighbors from the right point on. So for example, I could turn, let's go down there, and then let's come up here. And then basically these first 3 are going to be quite weird and not neighborly, but 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 are neighbors. As I exit, neighbors. So there are these little shortcuts dotted around the synth that as you start to learn it, you'll learn, oh, that's useful. Like for example, if I wanted to assign an LFO to control that cool wave scan that we just made, then there are a few different ways I could do it. I can go into the mod matrix and I click a button, and now I can assign a source, and I might want to choose LFO3, and I come to the middle and I choose a block I want it to go to. So for example, I could choose oscillator 1, come down, and let's have it change the pitch. Oh yeah, well let's randomize that. Well, let's initialize that, you know? But there's a quicker way. I could go LFO3 oscillator 1. And what I did just then was I said, I want LFO3 to control something in oscillator 1 section. And so it set it up for me. Hey, dude, LFO3 going into oscillator 1, and then it's controlling the pitch. However, if I come up here, I can change it to wave scan. Add some attack, hold Shift to move up the octaves. Maybe I'll use LFO4 and I'll send it into the mixer and I'll use it to control the panning of oscillator 1. That would be nice, wouldn't it? Oh, yes, mate. Try some of the different waveforms for LFO. Come to the mod matrix to access that. Make that more intense. I can't stress enough, I think that the interface of the Hydrasynth is a triumph. It is no easy thing to design the interface of a synthesizer where you have to share controls because you have such a complex engine. This is not a review, but I want you to know these are my genuine thoughts as to why I think it's been a success. This is what I was most struck by when I started messing around with it. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm not lost. Oh my goodness, I had fun. And in fact, I will just sit and I can explore and bounce around and go here to there to back to, let's just fine tune and explore and see where we go. It's a great interface, and I think anyone who's used it for a while will agree. Reason 3, you can randomize all of things. Now, where you have a synthesizer like this that has extraordinary capability, perhaps you'd like the synth to just suggest some things. Well, obviously, there's a load of presets, and there's more on the internet. You know, you can just go through banks of presets, and you can hold shift to move through them more quickly as well. But if we just go to a blank spot and hit randomize twice, it will generate a completely randomized patch. Oh. Ooh. Oh. Oh. That's what my difficult drone project needs. Oh. Oh, yeah. Wow. Now, a lot of the sounds that we'll randomize are quite weird, but I hope that you see the potential in that. If you have a DAW, as I'm sure you do, or a sampler, a Digitact or something like that, a device that can just spit out sounds that you can further shape and modulate and turn into pads or turn into drums or what have you, that is powerful. To be able to create random sounds is to say that you effectively can never be bored, because it will always do something that you would not have thought to make. And of course, then that's a starting point for you to then build a more like sculpted and finite version, or, you know, a more like, more you version of it. Maybe we'll get a bit more. Nice trad. Yeah, there we go. So you can treat those as starting off points. Something where you can hear a hint of something that you like. Ah, I know what that could be more like. And then go in and actually make that happen, just like that. Now, you may feel quite strongly that truly random randomness is not that interesting. And in fact, what you'd love to do is just slightly push things around in a way that you yourself could not necessarily have conceived. And if you update your Hydrasynth, as I've just done, for there have been a number of significant firmware additions to the Hydrasynth, including additional preset slots, the whole voice modulator thing where you can have like every note sound slightly different. Firmware updates have added more features to the randomness, such as the ability to choose the degree by which a section is randomized. And so we have this beautiful sound, which is one of the default presets, and I can just say that I want the oscillator section to be randomized by 10%. That was quite a lot. Wow. What I've retained is all of the vibrato and the controllability that's built into this sound. Where I push harder on a note, it has more vibrato, but I've totally changed the tonality. Oh. Wow. What? Oh. That is very cool. And one of many reasons to update your machine. There's been a load of cool things that they've added to this. One of the ones that I mentioned was this voice modulator thing. That's in here, in voice. We can come in here and we've got 8 different parameters. You can come and draw in these little notes. And this becomes a way of having 8 notes that this can play, all sound quite different to each other. And what I want to do is have it so that every note sounds very different. And I could come into the mod matrix and choose as my source the voice mod, and then send it to oscillator 1 to control the waveform by a very large amount. And in this way, do kind of like Oberheim 8-voice style patches where every note can be different, but that does not use randomness. In fact, I have created a quite deliberate set of voltages. Sorry, I live in a modular world a lot. These like values that I've chosen, and then I can send those values by that degree. So it's actually like a very controllable way of making a diverged, interesting polyphonic synth. Earlier I mentioned macros. These are the parameters, which if I go to like any of the presets, for example, there are these 8 controls that the sound designer has made available for me. And if you come in here to macro assign, you can go in and shape what they are. And a question that you might ask, one I definitely did, was if I go LFO5, for example, into macro assign, can I LFO the macros? Of course you blinking can. Of course you can. Of course you can. And so you can use LFOs to adjust these parameters that adjust parameters that adjust parameters, and everything dialed in, not random. And so in this sense, you have uber control to say, I want to randomize completely, or I want to randomize just a certain thing by a certain amount and explore the options that that gives me. And then I want to go in and be really specific about the controls that I want. I want to create one magic knob that's going to sweep loads of parameters for me in a really well thought out way. That is exactly what I want. Well, that's an option that you have too, in that one synth. Reason 4. Every Hydrasynth has Poly Aftertouch. Poly Aftertouch is the ability to have it so that each note can have different expression baked into it. Now I have the Hydrasynth desktop here, but on the Hydrasynth Deluxe, which is like double the power of a desktop, and also on the Hydrasynth Explorer, which I don't have here, every single one of these Hydrasynth models, you can play polyphonic Aftertouch. This means, even on the desktop, if I touch a pad like this, then I have individual expression over the swelling or any other timbral parameter, because you can map pressure to control any of the very bonkers amount of sonic things that we've explored that this can do. And on the keyboard versions, you can do that too. You have this ability to depress the key further and get this additional layer of aftertouch on a per key basis. Now, in most of this video, I've been using a thing called a desktop, which is one of the original models. That is an 8-voice Hydrasynth with the 8-knob interface. There is a keyboard version of that that also has a ribbon controller, but there's also a smaller and a bigger Hydrasynth. The smaller is called the Explorer and has the same sound engine as the original one, 8-voice, but it has a sort of more compressed interface and doesn't have the CV connectivity. You do have polyphonic aftertouch, but with minier keys. But of course, there's a bigger one, and that's this, the Hydrasynth Deluxe. And the difference with this one is it has 2 engines. So it can be one 16-voice Hydrasynth or 2 8 voices doing multi-timbral things layered together, just like a CS80. And Vangelis did have a Hydrasynth, bless him. Now, obviously, this is his massive keyboard, but we can constrain the keyboard to scales or just play around. We can choose the lower or upper sound, and we can blend them together in a multi, which is a combination of 2. Here we have 2 sounds. That one. And we can change their balance to find a nice marriage of the 2. Aftertouch, I can drone down here while going by biting into the key. Nice, isn't it? Here's a combo sound called Chrome Gold. Oh yes, what a G Vince Clarke is. This one's called the Hydra Orchestra, and, well, listen. There's no, like, I mean, I was about to say there's no samples, there's no, like, trombone samples, but there are wavetables. Can really swell. You can kind of orchestrate by slow depression or a gentle depression so that you're not really hearing a note until you bite into it like this. Pretty nuts. Look at that one. This is called Sin Horn, and this is a Glenn Darcy preset. Wicked. It's got a very kind of like 80s optimism, that. So weird. So many weird things you can do when you can layer this. And then obviously with Poly Aftertouch, make almost any parameter a thing that when you bite down, weird things happen. Or nice things. Reason 5. Nice people make good synths. I think you can learn a great deal about how a device will be if you meet the people who created it. And in the case of the Hydrasynth, as I mentioned right at the start of this video, I actually did get to meet the people who invented this. In fact, in like 2020, when I went to the NAMM show in January, I met the team behind ASM and filmed an interview with them, which I'll link below. And the people behind this include folks like Glenn Darcy, who used to work for Arturia and for Akai, and Daniel Troberg, who used to work for Electron. I met Dominic, who is the product manager, and Chen, who is worked on the software inside the Hydrasynth. And I, like, above all, was struck by how damn nice everyone was. And particularly an encounter that occurred where I also met the executive chair of ASM, who is called Fanny Cheng. And when I met her, she gave me a hug. She gave me a hug when I met her. I was like, that was not the normal greeting that you would normally have in such a potentially corporate encounter. And I was left thinking, how nice do you have to be? How nice a person do you have to be that you're that warm and kindly in your dealings as an executive in a company? And I bring this up because there is something that Glenn mentioned to me when I asked him both in that interview and also personally just about how he was finding the team and the experience of working in the company. He said that the people that he worked for at ASM were like family. And that's the kind of people that he wanted to work for. And I think in this age where we have these wonderful niche technology products where we actually can meet the people behind them, I'm really glad to see that there are devices like this that are bigger, more grand products, but that we can still meet the people behind them and discover to our great joy that those people are actually lovely. And there's a lot of soul and care and passion that's gone into this device because it's made by people who love this technology. Good people make good synths. I mentioned that interview that I shot with ASM's team. I'll link to that below. And if you're a fan of the Hydrasynth, what are your tips and tricks? What did I miss? Because you can bet there are about 1 billion things that I did not mention that this can do. Share your tips below. What did I miss? And what would you want everyone to know? Thanks very much. And we'll see you next time. Bye.